I'm going to talk about Facebook apps with Rails and a product called Facebooker, which is a plugin written by a guy named Mike Mangino. Just to start it off, I'm going to show you an application. Are people generally familiar with Facebook applications? Anyone? Is everyone on Facebook? Are people familiar with Facebook? I guess I assumed everyone was familiar. So Facebook applications are, oops, don't want to show you that yet. Just, okay, good. Really add-ons which developers write for Facebook. So there's one called Friends for Sale. And see, what happens is you can buy your friends, okay? So doesn't that sound like something really, which is going to improve society? Okay? And the greatest thing is they don't have a choice. You can always just, as long as you have the money, you can buy them. And whenever you log in, you get $10,000. So even if they're worth like $1 million, you just log in a lot of times and then you can buy them. So if you look at this application and you guys are familiar with Facebook, you almost don't even notice you're not in Facebook. You have on your right, I guess, a bunch of lines in a news feed which just looks just like your regular Facebook news feed in the middle of there. You have a look and feel which, you know, all the colors and everything look very much like Facebook. You see people like your friends. This guy David over here is a friend of mine, and he bought me without even asking first or anything. And these are some of the people I own. They're called pets in Friends for Sale. So you can see Maki sitting over here is one of my pets. I bought her for $500. Okay, so you may think that's very silly, and it is. Until you realize that that application is grossing over $1 million a month, just from ads, okay? Just from people who want to connect and have something silly, some reason to, you know, talk to their friends or whatever. So with Facebook apps, probably the most important thing is they allow you to leverage the Facebook user base. If you launch a new app, you know, and it goes viral, you'll get users, but it's going to take a long time. With Facebook, they have, I don't know, something like 500 million or something, maybe not that much, but they have a very, very large database, user base. And when you develop an app for them, you don't have to worry about getting people to sign in, worrying about, you know, are people going to come on and just do spam-like things or malicious things. You have that user base, and you have Facebook to take care of making sure that they behave properly. Another thing is you are able to leverage the Facebook infrastructure, things like the look and feel, like notifications, which I'll talk a little bit more about, and like feeds, which you saw before, where when you do something, it gets sent to all this user's friends so they know about what's happening with their friend and with your application. That's all stuff which there are very easy ways to leverage, and you don't have to write that functionality from scratch. Now, you do have certain limitations on your applications. You do not control your users. You have access to most of their information, most of the information that Facebook collects, at least, but you can't use that. And in fact, you are For performance reasons, they do allow you to cache things like names, like people's nationality, where they live. But in theory, you're supposed to remove that within 48 hours, and you can't like take it and use it or sell it or do anything like that. There are also some technical limitations. If you use some of the Facebook design constructs, you're limited in things you can do with things like JavaScript. Okay, and as I said, these are what you're doing when you're creating a Facebook app is you're creating something which gives people a way to socialize, and if you do that, you can just put ads or find other revenue sources, and there is some of these apps, probably not a whole lot, but some of them are making substantial amounts of money. Okay, so I'm going to go through the mechanics of developing a Facebook app. This section actually is a little bit more about the architecture, and then I'll go through the steps. Typically, with a Facebook app, your user is communicating through Facebook. Okay, so you will have something like a URL, appsfacebook.com. In the case of Friends for Sale, then that next thing would be Friends for Sale, and then whatever page. Once Facebook gets this, they will forward this on to your server, which will see it just like a normal request. If in the processing of this request you need some other information from Facebook, other information about your user, about other users who are involved in this request, then you can send a request to them and get some XML back with that information. Then you send Facebook an Fbml or HTML file, and then they take this and translate it into regular HTML and send it back to your user. This is the normal way you do it with Facebook. You can also use an iframe, in which case you are interacting with your user more directly. But usually it's like this. So there are a bunch of development tools which Facebook has made available to make Facebook development more easy. There's Fbml, which is just it's a subset of HTML with a lot of special Facebook tags added. There's FBJS, which is a JavaScript version of a Facebook version of JavaScript. There's a RESTful API, which is basically you're asking Facebook for data and it's sending you back some XML with that data. And there's something called FQL, which is kind of like the RESTful API, but it allows you a little more flexibility. So this is an example of some Fbml code. As you can see, the tags have that FB in the beginning. The first example is the way you would construct a Facebook-style menu bar. And the second is displaying some information about your user if that information is allowed to be displayed. So as I mentioned, there's also an iframe option. With the iframe option, basically you have an iframe within the Facebook page, and you can use just most regular HTML and JavaScript. For certain things, like for instance, Facebook won't forward multi-part data. So if you'd like to collect pictures from your user and put that in your application, or take that picture and put that in their Facebook album, you'll have to have them connect to your app to your server directly. I'm not going to talk too much about FBJS. It's basically a subset of JavaScript. You have some restrictions, and prototype doesn't work, but with Facebooker there's an implementation which allows you to use most of their functionality. So this is an example of the Facebook REST API. That friends.get is a command you would send over HTTP to Facebook, and then they would send you back some XML. When you're using Facebooker, you don't have to worry about parsing all that. So FQL is also, you send a RESTful request with the command FQL query, and then you send something which is very SQL-like. And this just allows you to be a little more flexible than the limited number of API calls which they allow. Now, with Rails Facebook, the previous stuff was all just related to Facebook. Rails Facebook is a plugin developed by a guy named Mike Mangino. Some of the features include parameter and signature checking. When you send a request to Facebook, an API request, you have to send them a bunch of things like an API key and a call ID. With Facebooker, you don't have to worry about any of this. Another thing they offer you is view helpers, which allows you to write stuff kind of like you would with a Rails form builder. You have wrappers for most of the REST calls, and you also have an action mailer kind of class for event feeds and notification. And I'll show examples of most of this in my application. So this is just a short review of, or a short introduction to the classes in Facebooker that usually are interacting with. The user, photo, album, affiliation, just wrap data which you would be getting from Facebook. They're not active record objects, and when you get one piece, it doesn't always get all of the data which you might want, so you might have to make additional calls. There's a session object, which we'll see very briefly. That just is the class which sends all these calls to Facebook. There's a form builder, as I mentioned, and there's also a publisher class, which works pretty much like Action Mailer. So these are just some of the example API calls similar to what I showed you before, but as you can see, they're just a lot more Rails-like. You don't have to worry about the nuts and bolts of the Facebook API. Okay, so we'll go about the steps to creating an app. Step one is you add the Facebook developer application to your Facebook profile, and we'll just go through that very briefly. It's pretty easy. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to log out of this because I have it here. Okay, so this is Mitchell Mad, just some new person on Facebook, and he would like to become a Facebook developer. So basically you just go to this URL. Okay, and this is for those of you who have added Facebook applications before, you always get these questions. Do you want to add this application to your account, and can it access my information, put a box in my portfolio, et cetera, et cetera? Just click this. Okay. So now you are officially a Facebook developer. So to create an application, the first step, the second step, I guess, is you just go and click on this, set up a new application, and call it whatever. And then basically you have a registered application. Okay? So some of the important settings when setting up an application. This is your Canvas page URL. So this is what you set up so that when so that this is where the user will go to, and this is from the address from which Facebook will forward stuff to your application. Okay. So that's that you set down here, whatever your, whatever your application is, www, whatever. This iframe versus Fbml is just what I mentioned before, and that's pretty much it in terms of the important things you need to get started. Okay. Okay, so step 3, once you've got those two things done, you go onto the Rails side and you install and configure the Facebooker plugin, and that can be found at GitHub. The thing you have to do once you've installed that is set up the Facebooker YML, typical Rails stuff. When you create your Facebooker application, your Facebook application, you get an API key over here and a secret key. So you have to put those in the YML file, as well as your Canvas page name and your callback URL. Now in this case, I'm using a tunnel at tunneler.com, so you also have this information down here. Okay, but basically, once the request comes, this is where you're going to be sending the information back to. Okay. So, oops, sorry. Okay, so just a couple of tips for developers. Tunneling, as I mentioned, is something you probably want to do because this way you can just develop from wherever you want. Otherwise, you're going to need a server. You're going to have to go through the whole cycle of developing on your machine, sending the stuff to the server, and then having Facebook hit the server and see how that goes. You're not able really to run the Facebook app local on your machine. So if you do want to develop on your own machine, you're going to have to use something like a tunnel. Another thing is test accounts. Facebook allows you to have test accounts so that you can test your application without sending your friends 100 annoying notifications about some feature you're trying to implement and you have bugs with it. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the application I'm developing. It's called stylact.com, and it allows you to solicit fashion advice. I thought about this because sometimes I put things on and I'm like, God, do these really match, or do these fit, or boy, I think this looks cool, but maybe it just looks really geeky. So I was thinking, well, it'd be nice to be able to, just send this out into the net and have people advise me about it. So this is what Stylact does. It kind of had some inspiration also from Hot or Not. You're probably familiar. You put a picture and people rate you. So in the way it works, it's kind of like Hot or Not, only you can ask the question. It's not just, am I a 1 or a 10? Okay, so Hot or Not's, just for regular people, but this is for more intellectual people who want to know more important information about their fashion. Okay, so I guess, let's see. So this is, this is Matter, one of my test users. And we'll go to, oops. Okay, maybe we have to reset the tunnel. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. So this is the introductory page. There's not much on here. One of the things which I really need to get this project going is to hire a designer. I do not want to lay out all this stuff which you saw on something like the Friends for Sale, because that's beyond my abilities or patience. So this is just an intro page. Okay. But as you can see, there are a few elements you might expect in Facebook. This is the, I showed you before, the Fbml for a menu bar, and this is a menu bar here. So to see what that looks like, before it was Fbml, here, this is the layout file for this Rails app. As you can see, you have these special tags like FB tab item, but this isn't Fbml code. This is Rails code, and these are tags which are made available by Facebooker. Okay. This Facebook messages over here you see with Welcome to Style Act. Okay. So that's just the way you can just Rails style way of giving your users status messages. Okay. I'll talk just a little bit about the setup in the application controller. It exposes this method called current user. Your current user is the guy who logged into Facebook on the Facebook site and then decided to access your application. Okay. So once he goes to your page, Facebook sends you all his information, and you can do with it what you want. And all requests you send go through his profile. So you can't just, the cute chick you saw 5 days ago, you can't just go in and get all her information if she's not friends with you. Okay. So you're limited to what Facebook allows you. Okay, so okay, sorry. So some of the features of Style Act, creating and managing what I call advice requests. There are things like, does this shirt match these pants? And of course, voting. Those are really the two main features. The controllers, advice request controller, votes controller. The models, advice request, advice question. In the original application, the non-Facebook application I did this with, you could have one outfit and maybe multiple questions. So there's a relationship there. I decided to keep that in case in the future I decide to go with that again. Although right now there's only one question to one request. Okay. So if you, the way this works is when you want some advice about your outfit, you go to the Give Advice page. The Get Advice page. And this will show you your Facebook pictures. The way this is working is you have this, for photos new, you have a parcel here which basically takes all your photos and displays them. And the way you get these photos, is in the Photos controller. Okay, so this is an example here of a RESTful call, which is done with Facebooker. So you have your current user, which I showed you before. Now, the current user is actually not a Facebook user. This is a class which you're going to have in your system and which is going to be an active record class, because when a user signs up for your application, you're going to want to keep that person's information. As I told you, you can't store their Facebook information, but there's going to be a lot of information from your application which you're going to want to attach to that user, like their advice requests and like their votes. Okay. So basically in this new method in the photos controller, you're talking to Facebook and saying, okay, get me all of the user's albums, and then once you have the albums, get all the photos and put them in this photos array. Okay. Now this is probably not what I want to do eventually. Eventually, you know, I mean, if the user has 3,000 pictures, I'm not going to want to take them all so they can, and then let them pick from that. There'll probably be a style act directory or something like that where they can put a picture in, or and then just get it from there. Ideally, I'd like them to be able to upload a picture through my application and then have that be put in a special album called Style Act in Facebook, but I haven't gotten the multi-part to work yet. So for right now, I'm just using pictures from in their current album. Okay, so this is the code which is displaying the pictures. So the next thing, you select one of these pictures, and then you ask a question like before: does this shirt match these pants? You guys can't really see this picture too well, but when it comes time to vote, you'll be able to see it better. Questions you can ask: a yes/no question, a multiple choice question where you make the choices, or an open-ended question where, you know, it's just like, how does this look? At some point, this choices thing, which really only pertains to multiple choice, is going to appear and disappear when you make your various choices, but I haven't figured out that JavaScript yet, and I'm hoping to find someone to figure it out for me rather than doing it myself. Okay, so you hit create, and there you have an advice request. So what's going on here is when you selected the photo, sorry. Oops. I guess I'm missing a slide. Oh, sorry. Okay. So the first thing that happened was when you selected the photo, it came here to your advice request controller. Okay. You basically got the PID, the picture ID of the Facebook picture, and then it goes to the advice requester, the advice request new page. It's going to do this redirect only if there's no picture ID. So this is the new page, and here you have the form which we just saw where you asked the question. As you see, this looks very much just like Rails. Instead of Form 4, you have Facebook Form 4. You have an embedded object there in the question, so you have a fields for. You have to specify the Facebooker form builder as your form builder. But besides that, this really, oh, and also instead of ar.submit, you'll have buttons, because Facebooker will allow you to have multiple buttons. But besides that, this is just pretty much standard. I mean, it looks like standard Rails code. Okay, ERB code, I guess I should say. Just for comparison, if you were to do this with Fbml, it would look something like this, which, you know, isn't too terrible, but it's just another thing to learn, which if you don't have to, why bother? Once you get this back, you will what happens is it's just going to save the request, save the question, and then down here it will publish the results to all your friends. Okay, so we will look at that. There's a class, as I mentioned, the publisher class, and subclasses of it. You subclass this, and then what you do is you have this request feed template, which is something you have to register with Facebook, and this is something which there's a rake task within Facebook, or which allows you to do that. And then whenever you want to send a request, you just call this request feed method. Okay, and like with Action Mailer, you have deliver and then this method. Okay, so just to see what this looks like, let's see. So we had Mad Matter, and this is his friend Jim Extieri. Okay, and as we see this is now not within my application. This is within Facebook. This is his regular feed, and you get this thing saying Mad Matter needs fashion advice. So he can click on this, and okay, so that is the previous request. The thing about the request publishing is Facebook doesn't guarantee that it's going to deliver it, and you're not sure of the timing. So if you're sending a whole bunch of requests to your friend, Facebook might aggregate it. Facebook might decide, well, I'm only going to send, one of these or two of these. So this should probably come soon. Maybe if we log out and log back in, we'll get it. Okay, and nope, still the old one. Okay, so anyway, you get the request, and then you can, choose your vote. Do I look good? No. Comment if you want, and then there you have it. So it's a little disappointing because the other picture was me in dress pants and a Led Zeppelin biking shirt. So anyway. Okay, so for more info, you can go to Developing Facebook Platform Apps with Rails. It's a pragmatic programmer's book. And there's more information on the Facebook Developer Wiki. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Questions? Our Facebook is no longer under development, and I don't think it's as extensive. So, Facebooker is currently in version .9.5, so it's still in beta. But it seems like they're still working on it, whereas our Facebooker, they're not. Yeah. There are tests for Fbml. So you can write some Fbml, and there's a testing tool which will allow you to look at it. I think for some of the other stuff, too, for some of the API calls also, and for notifications. But things with some of the tools, what works in a tool doesn't necessarily work in your code. So I think it's probably 90-95%, but I haven't used the tools. Debugging can be a pain in the butt, but for usual things, I haven't had too many problems. Mm-hmm.
I have a production Facebook app running,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been writing some code and I've upgraded something. Is there any way for me to test that on Facebook? Do I just start another application and test the upgraded application in a separate application, or is there another way of testing the upgrade before I actually upgrade all my users?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, it's like any other application. When you actually choose to roll out. I mean, Facebook is forwarding requests to you, but what it hits is what you put there. So, like with any other application, you have to think about the rollout. Yeah. Okay.
Wondering, I mean, I know the layout for what you've done so far is fairly basic, but do you know what flexibility, if any, you have with styling, assuming you're not using an iframe? Do they style the standard HTML tags for you?
Well, I think you can do your own styling. I haven't really experimented with that because I'm thinking with this app, the form looks very Facebook, but like the question curls up. That's not what I want. So I'm going to have to visit that at some point in the future. But right now, I'm not really sure the extent. I mean, they've been pushing Fbml and saying it's more efficient. I'm not really sure that's the case. I've looked on the web, and some people have disputed that. I mean, one thing, when you send them Fbml, they have to translate that. So there is one extra step. On the other, with the iframe, yes, it's 2 requests, but you're just sending straight HTML, which doesn't have to be translated. So who knows? Okay. Anything else? Okay. Well, if anyone knows a good designer, I could really use one. So let me know.
That concludes this episode of the SD.RB podcast. See you next time.